Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I'm going to be fighting Ultimate General Gettysburg, starting my first part of my Union Let's Play series. I did a 6-parter on the Confederate States of America, and a Let's Play through them, and won the Battle of Gettysburg in 6 battles across the full 3 days. It was an epic victory in which the Confederacy beat back the Union Army of the Potomac, and as a result were able to take the city of Washington in the United States' capital. In this video, I'm going to be going ahead and starting a Let's Play for the Union, the United States, and our goal to maintain the United States per history, winning the Battle of Gettysburg. The Union Army is a little bit different in that it deploys efficient artillery. It has better artillery. I talked a little about that in my last series. And has better drilled infantry. I'm not sure what that means, as well as better equipment. However, the Union generals are not as inspiring, so they don't have quite as big of an impact on their soldiers, and this causes poor performance in close combat and average morale, as opposed to the Confederates who have very high morale, so Union units typically cannot take as high a punishment as Confederate ones. I'm not sure how accurate that is when you consider the Union had units like the Iron Brigade, but I guess we'll see. In terms of difficulty, for the Confederacy, I played under cunning, so basically we had a cautious Union, although they were very difficult, to the highest level difficulty, but also the most cautious. I could go with dynamic or determined. Determined would be a very aggressive and difficult enemy that would attack me at every single moment of opportunity. Dynamic is a bit of a mix, where they'll probe and attack against our weak points, and then they'll make big, strong attacks. I'm going to go with dynamic because I think it fits General Lee's profile more. He wasn't always full-on, all-out attack, and General Jackson was killed at the Battle of Chancellorsville not long before the Battle of Gettysburg, who was the Confederacy's most aggressive commander. General Longstreet was much more cautious, and he was Lee's best lieutenant at the Battle of Gettysburg. So I think a slightly more cautious approach is going to be more accurate. So let's go into the battle. Now, we are going to fight the same initial battle as we did in the first scenario for the Confederate Let's Play that's arriving at Gettysburg. The scenario is 2 Confederate brigades are ready to advance on Gettysburg. Our mission is to delay them until the Army of the Potomac arrives and fortifies the high ground south of town. More enemy reinforcements are expected to join the attack. You will only have a few light units of cavalry at your disposal, but the First Corps is close to Gettysburg and will soon join your forces. Your mission is to hold as many locations as possible to delay the Confederate advance and attempt to drive them back to Hare Ridge. McPherson's Ridge is a good starting defensive position. Seminary Ridge must be held at all costs because it protects your reinforcement route. If you lose all of the locations, you lose the Battle of Gettysburg early. Good luck, General. So as you can see here, the Union starts with about 2,200 soldiers and 6 artillery pieces from Buford's cavalry division. The Confederates start with 4,182 soldiers from General Heath's infantry division, as well as 20 guns. We have about 9,000 expected reinforcements versus 4,000 expected Confederate reinforcements. So early we're outnumbered by about 2 to 1. Things even up as the battle goes on. So here you can see we've got our troops deployed in skirmish formations, and we have vedettes as well as our artillery battery. Now the Confederates have considerably more artillery than us, and it looks like they're out in this direction. So I'm going to take my vedettes and try and march around the Confederate infantry and threaten the enemy artillery. Vedettes are mounted cavalrymen in kind of a skirmisher-like formation. They don't seem particularly useful in stand-up fights, so I'd rather see if I can use them to maybe limit the Confederates' advantage in artillery. If I can take out 1 or 2 batteries, that could help my infantry sustain heavy Confederate artillery fire, considering we will be outgunned throughout the entire battle. As you can see here, we're deployed across McPherson's Ridge. General Buford's cavalry division is our main force. We're all in skirmish formation, which means we really don't have the ability to hold up against strong enemy attack. I will say this, however, Buford does have good terrain, and we do have room to fall back if we need it. So you can see here, we're ordering these guys to charge. It looks like Heath's skirmishers are being detached to counter us. The Confederates are moving infantry forward quickly, but we are charging in on this artillery. Hopefully we can impact some enemy batteries and hurt them pretty bad. They both start with around 60 soldiers. So you can see there Davis has driven back one of our regiments. Gamble's skirmishers are falling back as well, and the Confederates already pushing us back. No. This is, again, mirroring the historical action that took place on July 1st. General Heath's cavalry division, infantry division, was tangoing with General Buford's cavalry division. You can see there we inflicted almost 50% casualties on each of those artillery batteries. So that's going to be useful because casualties do carry over from battle to battle. Looks like the enemy has slowed down a bit, and we are engaging them in a stand-up fight. I think one of the interesting things about history when you consider the Battle of Gettysburg is there seems to be this reputation of the initial fight for General Buford's division on McPherson's Ridge as sort of this, incredibly difficult and costly battle in which the Union lost very, very heavily. And while the Union troops under Buford certainly performed admirably, it doesn't exactly accurately represent the situation at hand. The Confederates, while attacking Buford pretty quickly, Buford didn't deploy in a straight line of battle and fight it out, in kind of traditional terms. He used cavalry much in the Civil War manner of basically charging, basically using his horses to get around the battlefield very quickly, and then, using the mobility, basically dismounting and fighting on the ground, but using the horses to get around the field very quickly. And that was an important factor in this battle, in that it allowed the Union to initially actually defend in a skirmish formation across Hare's Ridge. General Heath deployed, pushed them back from Hare's Ridge to McPherson's Ridge, where they held out, and the Union First Corps ended up coming to the rescue under General Reynolds. Buford's troops didn't lose incredibly heavily in terms of casualties. It was a very intense and well-fought affair, but it wasn't, again, an incredibly bloody one. It was a fight in which the Union didn't lose kind of bloodbath-like casualties like you might think if it was a full-on attack. So I do think that's one thing that maybe is kind of misconstrued. I think the movie Gettysburg, which is many people's primary source of information on the Battle of Gettysburg, is a little bit skewed in that sense. It seems to maybe do a little bit of discredit to Buford's tactical abilities and ability to kind of fight a delayed action. Because essentially when a division of troops are marching down a road, they're in a very, very long, thin column, which in order to effectively fight, because you can only have a couple of people shooting four at once, in order to effectively fight, you've got to deploy from this thin column you can see here that Cutler's in, into a line of battle, similar to what you see General Archer's brigade over here in. And that takes time. For one brigade, it can take a while. For an entire division, it can take hours. It can take the better part of a morning for a division to get deployed into line of battle from column formation. So I think that's one thing that people don't really consider, is that by deploying in skirmish formation along Hare's Ridge, the enemy had to waste hours getting into formation. And then from that point on, again, they had to use more time to get over McPherson's Ridge, and then the more important position ended up being Seminary Ridge. But it's just an example of kind of how an effective but far smaller unit can be against a larger enemy unit. So there's that. And another thing that I think is interesting, and the movie Gettysburg underscores it a bit, is the importance that General Reynolds had. General Reynolds wasn't just the commander of the First Corps. He was the commander of the entire left wing of the Army of the Potomac. He commanded the First Corps, the Third Corps, and the 11th Corps. By de facto, he was a superior officer in terms of experience and rank to these other officers, and while he was not technically in charge, General Meade did trust him to command that wing of the Army until Meade came up. Reynolds rushed his troops here and basically stood up for Buford's decision to fight along these ridges. He basically made the decision, we're going to commit the army here against General Lee, and what might have been just a skirmish between cavalry troops ended up being a major battle as a result. Now, Reynolds was killed very early in the fight. Somewhere around these woods here south of McPherson's Ridge is the believed position of his death. It's thought he was killed by a sniper, although it could have been a volley. He was behind the 2nd Wisconsin, which is a member of the Iron Brigade here. And his death really kind of shocked the Union Army, led to a bit of disorganization, and may have helped cause the Union defeat later in the first day's battle. So his importance is pretty paramount. He was actually a superior in terms of his date of promotion to General Meade. He would have been a higher ranking officer than Meade, and it's thought that General Reynolds was offered command of the Army of the Potomac, and that he turned it down shortly before Gettysburg because of political concerns. Basically, he didn't want to have to deal with the politicians. He wanted he wanted the president to shield him from those politicians, and he wanted to basically have a free hand, kind of like General Grant, ironically, would have later on in the war. He wasn't given those things, so he just declined command of the Army of the Potomac, and as a result, it went to General Meade, who was below him. Now, Reynolds was an influential character, whether he was in command of the army or not, however, and was also influential in getting the previous commander, General Hooker, removed from command. They believed basically that we need a new commander, and him and several other officers came forward and helped oust General Hooker. So he was very involved in terms of the politics of the army, and yet at the same time he did not want the politics of the army determining who could basically command and what they could do as commanders. He believed that that was a critical failing in the political structure of the Army of the Potomac, and probably turned out being right. The Union Army didn't have a whole lot of success against the Confederates till those restrictions began being loosened when General Grant took over. It's interesting because Reynolds was regarded as perhaps the best general in the entire Army of the Potomac, and yet he was killed on the first day. One of the other best commanders of the Army of the Potomac, General Hancock, was his close friend, who commanded the Second Corps. Now, Hancock was much inferior in terms of rank, just recently took over a corps. The Battle of Gettysburg was the first time he commanded a corps command, although he did do an admirable job with the rear guard and some actions at Chancellorsville, which had a big part in him becoming a corps commander. Hancock, who was, again, a close friend of General Reynolds, despite his friend's death, was a influential soldier throughout the rest of the war, one of the best Union generals of the war, and would end up rising to being one of the most senior corps commanders. He would be wounded at Gettysburg and would become kind of a hero of Gettysburg as well. And it's just kind of interesting that, again, Hancock was friends. I think another interesting thing with the movie Gettysburg is it kind of plays up Hancock and General Lou Armistead's friendship. While this is true, one thing that is totally played down is Reynolds and Armistead's friendship as well. General Reynolds and Hancock were good friends. General Reynolds and Lou Armistead were also good friends. The Confederate commander who died during Pickett's charge on the third day of the battle. I think that's interesting. I haven't read the book. I know it's based on Killer Angels, so maybe that has more to do with the book than it does reality. But I just find that interesting that they basically gloss over Reynolds' importance, focus exclusively on Buford really in that movie, and then also kind of ignore the friendship that Armistead and Reynolds had as well. I guess you see those kind of compromises made in Hollywood films, though. It's not too uncommon. You can see here Campbell's skirmishers are getting lit up by artillery, somewhat because I've got these troops behind they're behind a reverse slope, so Confederates are kind of here on the peak of the ridge, and essentially high ground is important. You want to be able to fire down into your enemy. You are a much more accurate shooter if you're shooting down into your enemy as opposed to shooting up at them. However, there are some benefits to being just below the peak of the hill. It protects you from artillery fire because they can't see you and there's not a whole lot in the way of indirect fire. And it also does a good job of allowing you to get a really good strong volley off as the enemy just peeks across that corner to see you there. Actually, whether you like it or not, I saw some comments in one of my previous videos about the movie The Patriot. It's kind of what they do. They hide behind a ridge line, the enemy comes over the ridge, and then they get just hammered. But you can see here, so far I've been able to hold off the Confederates pretty well. Looks like we're about a halfway point in this battle. Got the Iron Brigade and Cutler's Brigade up here. Iron Brigade, one of the most storied Union infantry brigades in the entire war, but General Pettigrew's massive brigade of 2,500 soldiers is coming for it. So hopefully we're able to hold. Again, the Iron Brigade was one of the most storied Union brigades in the war. Got its nickname after, I believe, the Battle of South Mountain, where General McClellan, the commander of the Union Army at the time, said that the men fought like iron, or something along those lines. Whereas by Gettysburg, they were a veteran unit of all Western soldiers, so it was a unit of soldiers from the West, basically three regiments from Wisconsin, one from Indiana, one from Michigan, something like that. The Michigan regiment was added just before the Battle of Gettysburg, and it was renowned for its success. It fought incredibly hard at the Battle of Gettysburg, lost more troops than any other brigade did at the Battle of Gettysburg. It had over a 60% casualty rate, which is just astronomical for on the brigade level. It had 2 or 3 of the most heavily hurt regiments in the entire war, losing over 80% of their men, and yet it was involved heavily in the first day's Battle of Gettysburg, launching some of its regiments fought here in the south in McPherson's Woods. Some of them fought a little bit further north, famously in this, I believe this was where it is, the unfinished railroad cut, where they took almost Archer's entire brigade captive. It was a very well storied, very well fought unit that has been lionized for its success at the Battle of Gettysburg on the first day and played a critical part. Another unit which doesn't get quite as much credit is General Cutler's unit, which was made up of New Yorkers. Again, one of the first 2 infantry brigades to arrive to relieve General Buford. And while Buford's men, who fought tactically well, did not quite engage on the same level of, intense line volley firing that perhaps the later units did, the First Corps fought incredibly difficulty. They lost a huge portion of casualties. I think something like 30 to 40% of the First Corps were casualties by the end of the first day's fight. This was just a bloodbath that these Confederates came on. The Union was heavily outnumbered, and yet fought very, very well and very, very held their own very effectively. And while these ridges maybe were not as important because the main fighting would end up taking place to the south here, they were critical in deciding the engagement because the Confederates basically came on to the Battle of Gettysburg outnumbering the Union substantially, and the 1st and 11th Corps played an instrumental role in buying time for the rest of the Union Army to come up. The Union Army had 7 corps, the Confederates only 3. Confederate corps tended to be much larger, however, so in terms of fighting, effectiveness, a single Confederate corps might be worth 2 or 3 Union corps. Well, not 3, but probably 2 Union corps in terms of men. Looks like we just lost Oak Hill. Frankly, it's too far north to bother with. I have no way I'm going to hold that. So we'll have to deal with losing Oak Hill. But the Union had 7 corps all stretched out. They had the 1st, the 11th, in close proximity to Gettysburg. They also had the 12th, which was under Slocum, which would come on later on the 1st. So the Union only had a couple of corps. The Confederates had over 50,000 men to throw at the Union, who might have only had 25 to 30,000 men in the first day's fight. So it was a battle which started out and the Confederates had massive advantages. It was essentially a delaying action. The Union held their ground on Hare's Ridge, got pushed back, held their ground on McPherson's Ridge, got pushed back, held their ground on Seminary Ridge, nearly to be destroyed as a result of a flanking maneuver up north here near Blucher's Knoll, and fell back to Seminary Ridge. It was basically a moving battle, a battle of maneuver, in which the Union got pushed from position to position, but remained resilient. And I think it speaks a lot to General Reynolds' understanding of the ground and a decision to basically back up General Buford and decide to fight here. That was a big influence on the Union's eventual success, because obviously the Union was successful in the Battle of Gettysburg, defeated the Confederacy. They had brilliant terrain, and that really can all be traced back to this very first battle, where a couple thousand cavalry were engaged with a couple thousand infantry, which is not uncommon at all. You don't hear a lot about those battles in the Civil War. And Reynolds committed over 20,000 Union troops to the battle. And while he was killed near the very start of the battle, that decision in of itself played a huge role in deciding what would happen with the eventual result of the Battle of Gettysburg, and in some degree the Civil War. The Battle of Gettysburg, while not ending the war by any means, and the bloodiest months were still to come, it ended the Confederacy's ability to launch large-scale offensives. You had Antietam, which paled in comparison in terms of total Confederate troops involved. They had almost twice as many men at Gettysburg. And then you had Gettysburg. And after Gettysburg, the Union would never again have to worry about defending its territory, with the exception of a lone corps, which was sent north by General Early. And again, the Union was, from here on out, the Battle of Gettysburg, the Union would be on the offensive. There'd be limited tactical counterattacks, limited raiding parties, which you could really classify General Early's as. But the Battle of Gettysburg marked the beginning of the end, the high water mark. The Confederates had their chance. They attempted to defeat the Union Army on their own soil, attempted to do something that might change the course of the war. They failed. They lost over 20,000 men. The Confederacy at the Wilderness had almost the same size army as they did at Gettysburg, but this really marks the last time the Confederacy posed a serious threat on the battlefield to ending the Union Army's ability to fight in order to win. Even if General Grant had withdrawn from the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, or any other numerous battles afterwards, never again would the Union Army risk actually being destroyed. Maybe some of the limited counterattacks that Longstreet launched. He did launch a pretty phenomenal attack early on in the Battle of the Wilderness and nearly routed the Union Army from the field. So maybe I'm speaking out of turn. Maybe I'm just rambling at this point. I don't know. But it really was a turning point, and there's a reason historians kind of talk about it, because it's the last strategic offensive that the Confederacy would take. From there on out, they would be on the defensive. You might have had a chance for something different happening at the Battle of North Anna during the Overland Campaign if General Lee was healthy, but he wasn't. And, you don't really see another battle where the Confederacy is on the offensive. And I say that from a tactical standpoint. Wilderness is all defensive. A counterattack, okay, give you that. But mainly a defensive battle. Spotsylvania, defensive battle. Overland Campaign, all defensive battles. Very bloody for the Union, but all defensive battles. The Battle of Gettysburg was not a defensive battle. The Union fought on the defensive against the Confederacy. Battle of Second Manassas was not a defensive battle. Yes, they were defending their territory, and yes, a large percentage of it was the Union Army on the offensive, but a strategic move bringing Longstreet's corps in, strategic redeployment from the south to the north, was an act of aggression which General Lee intended the entire time to strike against the Union Army, to launch that massive attack that would drive them from the field. The Battle of Chancellorsville, a Union offensive, but the Confederates launched a strategic counterattack. So, okay, maybe the Wilderness is the last time that the Confederacy launched an attack like that, because they did do something very similar to Chancellorsville at the Wilderness. But you'd never see that Second Manassas again. You'd never see that Battle of Antietam again. You'd never see a Gettysburg again. You'd never see the 7 days, where for 7 straight days, General Lee launched counterattack after counterattack against the Union Army. He had just, after Gettysburg, too many high-quality officers had been lost, and the Confederacy never really recovered. My take, anyway. Some historians believe differently. But as you can see here, this battle is starting to come to an end. We have held our ground pretty well. The Confederacy came out and gave us a bit of a push, but in the end, it ended up being a draw. They took Oak Hill. They held Hares Ridge. They lost about 100 more men than we did. We held Oak Ridge and Seminary Ridge, and the battle ends in a draw. So our options now are to defend the ridges north of town at all costs, withdraw to Seminary Ridge and reinforce Cemetery Hill, or ignore Oak Hill and defend these southern ridges. So I'm going to leave that decision for the next video. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe a little bit less structured in that video than some of my previous ones with specific talking points, more or less rambling on the history of the war. But yeah, that's going to do it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, this is the Historical Gamer signing out.